Okay, so I'm here to present a little insight into the experiences of Black students at predominantly white institutions, particularly using the critical race theory as my lens to better understand this. So let us begin. So the reason I chose this topic was foremost my identity as a Black student at not necessarily a predominantly white institution, but a non-Black institution, not non-Black in a terrible way or anything. And also I have a passion for getting people to understand slavery's legacy. I think that that is extremely important in the country that we live in. And I'm just really adamant on us not forgetting that it happened and that it's still problematic. And I also wanted to use my research to further confirm the existence of the experiences had by Black students. I just wanted to make sure and assure myself that it is true and that we're not just making it up. And I also wanted to create meaning and make sense out of my own personal experiences in college. And also I wanted to regard, CRT is critical race theory. I wanted to regard the critical race theory as one of the most pertinent gateways in understanding adversity that Blacks face at predominantly white institutions. So here are some foundational statistics. Out of all of the Black students enrolled in college, 75% of them are enrolled at predominantly white institutions. I think that's extremely voluminous, or it speaks volumes rather. 51% of white men in college are expected to graduate in 4 years, and 60% of white women are expected to graduate in 4 years. Versus the Black population, only 23% of Black men are expected to graduate, and 35% of Black women are expected to graduate. So as you can see, the expectancy for Black students is nearly half of that for white students. Why these numbers? So basically, not until I understood the historical Black and white relations in the United States, these statistics didn't make sense to me until I delved into that. In other words, in order to recognize Black and white relations, you have to recognize Black and white relations as the foundation of these statistics. And you also have to regard white supremacy as the core of those historical relations between Blacks and whites in the United States. Okay. So when I was doing my research, I wanted to find the earliest university established, and according to history, that is Harvard University. As we know, Harvard is one of the, if not the most prestigious college there is around. So when I think about that, Harvard was established in 1619, and slavery was introduced in 1636, I believe. So I think when you consider the surface of both Harvard and slavery, it's extremely important given that it happened around the same time, and you must consider the social climate of the time to understand Harvard University. And during that time that Harvard is being established, given slavery, Black people are obviously considered the villain and inferior race. So we weren't allowed an education during this time, and if we were allowed an education, we were free, and if we were free, that education was extremely, extremely subpar. It was extremely private, and it was extremely segregated, and no one knew that you were educated for the most part. And this is an advertisement that I found during the rise of desegregation within public schooling, and it's just, I thought it was extremely important, and I needed a visual for the time that universities and college was, coming about. So. How does this translate into current experiences? So if you're familiar with slavery the way I'm familiar with slavery, Black people weren't considered intellects. We were biologically considered not intellectual. They didn't think that we had it in us to really develop in the classroom. We were unfit for scholarship. And I think this translates into current experiences because now Black students who are in predominantly white institutions adopt this feeling known as an academic imposter, and it's the feeling that you have when you feel as if your intelligence are false, they're not valuable, they're invalid. And it's not until Black students enter predominantly white institutions when they begin to doubt their intellectual abilities, rather. And also, white supremacy has a dominating influence in our education system. This has led to an extremely Eurocentric curricular within our education, and that has further led to something known as academic dissonance. And it's this idea that Black students feel absent in their schoolwork. They feel absent in the classroom, they feel underrepresented, they feel misrepresented. And that's just another adversity in their collegial experience. So let's get into the critical race theory. So the critical race theory is a theory that was born during the 70s. It was a reactive theory from the civil rights movement, and it was brought up from about 7 to 8 scholars. I'm not exactly sure the number, but they intended to re-examine the persistence of racism in America and simply acknowledge it as something that is still extremely, extremely relevant and permanent and present and unmoving. And they also wanted to re-examine the absence of racial reform within the traditional civil rights legislation. Within the critical race theory, there is no official set rule or ideas or anything. However, generally, all scholars have come together to establish 7 central themes or tenets. And I extracted 4 from the 7 central themes, which I find most important for my presentation. And these are the themes that I chose out of the 7. So the first is racism is permanent, intersectionality, the challenge to dominant ideology, and centrality of experiential learning or experiential knowledge. So let's get into racism being permanent. So basically what this theme explores is that race is not real, but we operate as if it is. And we operate with it as it is a social construct, and it is based on race. Racism is obviously based on race. And it is also something that is completely woven and ingrained into American culture, and that's something that we can't ignore, and we also can't necessarily do much about it because it's so ingrained and it's so permanent. And we also need to consider the fact that groups of color, colored students, whoever, minorities, are judged against this rubric, which is historically white, Christian, middle class, heterosexual. So if you don't necessarily fit in those categories, a lot of the time you are discriminated against. The second idea is intersectionality, and this is basically the idea that people who are oppressed for more than one reason, not just their race, not just their gender. So understanding Black students, you should understand that a Black student could be unhappy or feeling inferior for numerous reasons. It could be they're Black and Muslim, they're Black and gay, they're Black and disabled, they're Black and transgender. So it's more than one reason for someone to be oppressed, and that's what intersectionality basically upholds. And it recognizes oppression as something that's completely multidimensional and not just one level. Challenge to dominant ideology. So this particular theme mostly challenges white privilege and this theme basically challenges white privilege, and it understands that our society has been heavily influenced by white supremacy, and it questions the concept of being color neutral and colorblind, and it considers that concept as a way to further disguise white supremacy, because obviously if you're not seeing color, then you're not seeing the privileges or the adversities that tag along with your color. I said that, okay. And the last and most important theme to me of the 4 that I chose was the centrality of experiential learning. And basically this just values our stories and our lives as Black people in the classroom, and wanting to have those experiences and those narratives intertwined into classroom material. And it also considers our knowledge based on our experiences as real and valid and completely appropriate for academics. And it also recognizes experiential knowledge as something that is extremely pivotal, I guess, and pertinent to a whole education. If you're seeking that intercultural knowledge, I think it's important to have people in the classroom who have lived the narratives that you're trying to teach and that you're trying to portray. And lastly, what I extracted from my presentation towards the end that I think is extremely important is I think experiential knowledge and learning is extremely, extremely important. And as a student, in college, I didn't necessarily get this, and I wish I did, to be quite honest with you. I think it would have made, I think it would make a lot of Black students' experiences in predominantly white institutions extremely, extremely whole, and what's the word I'm looking for? Multidimensional, rather. And lastly, I think that coming to terms, if you are someone who is kind of, actually let me rephrase, if you would like to understand this a little better, I think foundationally it is extremely important that you come to terms with the history of Blacks and whites in the United States. I don't think there's any way else around it. I think that Black and white relations are extremely defining, I guess, and it's real and it happened, and it's an extremely important part of our narrative as a nation. And when I rehearsed, the question that I got towards the end was, well, what can we do, or what do we do to help, or what do we do? And I don't think there are any answers. There are endless suggestions, there are endless ideas, but because it's so subjective, because it's so permanent, and because it's been something that's like basically the fabric of our nation, it's really hard to combat it, I guess, or overcome it, or overthrow that entire racism. So yeah, there aren't any answers. I personally don't have any answers, so that's what I wanted to conclude with. That's the end of that. I saw.
So answers are hard, but looking at your Marymount experience, what suggestions do you have, Kayla? What are 3 things that Marymount could do to help?
I think we need more faculty of the minority races. I think we need, no offense. I think no offense to what I'm about to say next. I think we need younger, and there's nothing wrong with elderly faculty staff, obviously. There's obviously nothing wrong with that. But I think just a little more modern approach to curricular, and a little more culturally relevant, I guess, approach to curricular, I think that would really help. And to see yourself teaching would be extremely useful. I feel like if I had a Black woman teacher, it would have been, it would have been a little, I would have felt more represented. I would have felt more motivated, I think.
One more
thing. I think students here don't like talking about very, very important and difficult things. A lot of the time we just rather curtail or ignore the situation, or kind of think we know, but we don't necessarily want to get into the nitty-gritty of what's really truly happening. I think I went to a school that a lot of the students, ignorance was bliss for them, and I think that that's the culture on campus. And I feel like if we were to change that culture, whether it be through programming, whether it be through curricular, whether it be through, I don't know, presentations, I feel like that would also make a really, really big difference. Yeah.
You said you wish that you had realized, I think you said realized, that experiential knowledge would have been helpful to you. I don't think I quite understand what you mean. What would you have done differently? You mean at your own experience?
Like I'm wishing I had like a professor who kind of, a professor of a minority race who kind of endured oppression in certain ways that I would be able to relate to, and like have their experience factor into their teaching, have their actual lives and their narratives factor in and influence.
Now, so would it have to be an African American type of oppression? Because many people have felt oppression, in different ways.
For different reasons.
And would that be?
For me
useful?
personally,
Yeah.
For me personally, because I'm African American, so I would have liked that personally. But I mean, it's different for every other person. So, Mom.
After doing all this research, how do you see yourself lending your knowledge and what you have learned at Marymount to further or educate younger African American minorities in getting to college or experience what you have experienced?
I'm biased. I think when it comes to educating the public, I think as a black woman, a lot of the time people expect me to educate them when I didn't learn all of this until I went out and learned it on my own.
Yeah.
And I think if you really care and if you're really, really sincere about understanding, then you would teach yourself, because it's not that hard. And I mean, you know, like you didn't raise me in a we are us, they are them household. It was people are people. And it wasn't until I got older I branched out on my own and kind of drew myself to like being I'm black, like I am black and they are not me. But that's something that I adopted on my own. And I think it depends on if you're extremely committed to understanding and learning oppression of other people, and if you're really an ally, then you would take it upon yourself.
Right, but you have young black girls, like,
Ooh.
say, getting to high school.
Mhm.
They may not know where
To
you
go.
are coming from or where to
Oh.
go. And my question is, how do you see yourself helping in that direction?
I mean, it starts with the conversation. It starts small on a really low scale. I don't think anything can be reformed without conversation, without discussion, without debates, without understanding, I guess. And I think what the younger generation should do is read a little. I feel like the younger generation now is completely just not into history anymore. And I was like that when I was younger. I hated history. Like, I wanted nothing to do with it. And I really think it's just a matter of maturity. Like, you want to understand where you're going in life, so you need to understand what happened. You need to understand, like, where you came from. And I think how it just starts with the conversation. Granted, I don't have friends much younger than me. And the people who I do surround myself with who are younger, they're kind of... how can I say this without talking myself in a hole? Let me rephrase. Let me backtrack and rephrase. Conversation, for one. And I think just as a black woman, just portraying my love for my people and portraying because I am obsessed with my people. And I think when you brand yourself like that, then it'll just influence other people to want to do the same thing, whether they're black or not. Like, it'll just influence them to kind of tap into their culture, tap into their background to do anything. But I feel like you have to start with yourself. I don't think I can force anybody to believe or adopt any ideology without having that idea, without harboring that ideology myself. So I think it starts with me, but it also starts with conversation. And you open someone up with a small conversation.
Starting with you, what does all of this learning do for you as you consider going on to graduate school, which is a mecca for feeling like you are not academically worthy? Every person walking into grad school, whether they say it or not, is feeling that. So how will this influence your experience of that?
I think the luxury about grad school is it's a little, well, granted, I'm not in grad school, so I don't really know, but from what I've heard about grad school, it's a little more, you can make it more personal, you can personalize it a little more, you can personalize exactly what you need to learn. I think it's more about you, not so much what's being presented to you. I think you have a decision to choose where you want to put yourself, what classes you want to take, so I think it's a little easier. You have a little bit more control over your environment, I think, I would assume. I also just feel like research your grad school. Look up the demographics of your grad school, look up all the different things that would affect you, given that you just left undergrad and I had these kinds of feelings. That's my plan for grad school, just do research, and literally pick the grad school that seems perfect for me and who I am right now, I would think.
Thank you so much, Kayla.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, so today, again, I'm Jesse Nkosi, and today we'll be talking about an epidemic growing in the United States with over-the-counter and opioid drugs. So in choosing this topic, I knew I had a passion for the chiropractic field. I have more of a holistic philosophy that says that the cause and cure of all disease lies within the body. that through natural cures we can encourage the body back to natural balance. And I wanted to know the truth about over-the-counter and opioid drugs. So these two questions rose when in researching my topic. So with drugs for nearly every symptom and multiple drugs for every illness, do we know what we are consuming? And are pharmaceutical industries in the United States leading America to safer alternatives to promoting healthy lifestyles? I forgot to mention. So the opposing viewpoint of my holistic views sees a problem coming from outside the body. Meaning when a person has caught a bug in some disease, they need the symptoms treated or covered up, usually with drugs. So let's jump in here. In 2014, about 34,000 deaths resulted in car crashes. In the same year, 34,000 deaths resulted in gun violence. More than 47,000 deaths in the United States resulted in drug overdoses. In the 1990s, OxyContin, Vicodin, and Percocet quickly became the popular choices for treatment of chronic pain. And the Institute of Medicine argues that 100 million people in the United States suffer from chronic pain. And that constitutes over 1/3 of all Americans in the United States. America's epidemic. In 1991, 76 million prescriptions were dispensed. In 2011, this number peaked to 219 million. Emergency room visits from pill abuse was at 145,000 in 2004. And just 4 years later, that number more than doubled to 306,000 visits. What makes drugs so powerful is the same thing that makes them so dangerous. They act on the same parts of the brain as heroin and morphine. So a little about over-the-counter drugs. Acetaminophen and NSAIDs are both over-the-counter, meaning you can buy them from a store without a doctor's permission. Acetaminophen is the most common active drug ingredient in the United States, found in more than 500 over-the-counter prescription medications. And these examples include Dayquil, Sudafed, Robitussin, and Tylenol. NSAIDs, little known, cause stomach bleeding, heartburn, and ulcers if taken the wrong way. And they are found in more than 900 over-the-counter prescription medications. Examples include Advil, Aleve, ibuprofen, and Excedrin. Tylenol did a study that 40% of people did not read what the active ingredient was on their medicine. Acetaminophen has become the #1 cause of acute liver failure in the United States from accidental overdoses. Over-the-counter products are overproduced, with over 500 medications for relief of minor aches and pains. Some over-the-counter pain medications blend both acetaminophen and NSAIDs, risking doubling or tripling the amount of one ingredient. So a little about opioid drugs. Opioid drugs are important prescribed medications for easing suffering on a short-term basis. Opioids come from opium, a plant, and you create oxycodone and hydrocodone from opium in the same way you create heroin from opium. In 2010, doctors prescribed enough opioids to medicate every American around the clock for a whole month. There are extended release forms to try to minimize the effect of pleasure in opium or opioids. Ways to get around that are by crushing, snorting, or injecting. Tolerance becomes a problem with repeated use, and dosages increase as it becomes more addictive. Studies show that increased usage also resulted in increased use of heroin. In 2013, 1.9 million people were dependent on opioid medication. Having a history with these medications increased the risk for overdose. Doctors often report concern about managing patients with chronic pain stressful, and they express concern about patient addiction and report insufficient training in prescribing. Consequences of opioid medication. Pharmaceutical drugs artificially alter the body in one of two ways. They either slow down the system's operations or they accelerate operations. And the result is overall loss of strength and tissue breakdown with short-term benefit and long-term weakening. And if this is true, does this have anything to do with the return to health? Natural cures such as exercise therapy, physical therapy, chiropractic, and more have been overlooked in the past 75 years. To give the illusion that the goal of medicine is health. But it is evident that the goal of medicine is just more medicine. Concluding thoughts, these attitudes and beliefs, combined with increasing trends in drug use and disorder and overdose, underscore the need for better provider guidance and prescribing. Guidelines focused on prescribing can improve knowledge, change prescribing practices, and benefit patient health. Lastly, I want to leave you with this quote by Morpheus from The Matrix. This is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you to the truth. Thank you. Any questions?
I have a question, but it's more incredulity. So are you telling me people who have a prescription for opioid drugs actually take it and grind it up to snort it to get a better high?
Yes.
So they're not really taking it for pain?
They're not, no. The problem is that doctors are they're not knowledgeable enough to know what amount of pain each individual has.
Right. Well,
So they're nervous about it, so they overprescribe it. And then the patients love the feeling of the drug. And then they overtake it, they love the feeling, they want more, they try to get around the effect of the long release forms. And they crush, they snort and inject to get that initial high.
From your research, did you find that doctors are learning the way they learned? It seems that doctors have learned not to overprescribe antibiotics because they've seen the ill effects of bacterial resistance to antibiotics, partly from overprescribing. So now that this is out there, this kind of research, are you seeing any evidence? Did you find any evidence that doctors are learning not to prescribe so much?
It's back and forth. What's it called? There are numerous doctors that have turned certain new drugs down because they understand the effects that have happened with Percocet, Vicodin, and hydrocodone. And there's actually stronger drugs coming out approved by some companies. And although they're coming out with more, better, stronger drugs, some doctors say yes, some doctors say no. So it's just up to us to be educated enough to go out there and know our doctors.
Well, that's part of what the next thing, I just wanted to say, you were really talking about two things because the over-the-counter drugs aren't
Yeah.
prescribed, so we really
Yeah.
have to be the knowledgeable ones. So there needs to be work in that area too.
Exactly, yeah.
Jesse, where's your line with acute pain? Because you were speaking a lot about chronic pain, but what about when it's unmanageable? Where does that fit for you in terms of using these drugs?
Acute pain?
Yeah, so
Over the counter?
No, actually the more heavy duty stuff. But what if someone has cancer and is in
Sure.
huge pain all
Sure.
the time? Does your line change for
Yeah,
that?
I think it does. I think hospitalization, post-hospitalization, or post-surgery are all good reasons to take opioid medication. But as far as prescribing for, like long work days or something like that, back pain, chronic back pain. There's a fine line where I think doctors are giving out too much medication. So, yeah, that's my standpoint.
Then as a chiropractor, do you get into this before the person starts on any pain meds, or is chiropractic the way to ease them off and complete treatment non-prescription? Or is it, do you want to get them before they even start it, or does it
Yeah.
depend on what the...
Well, I think every patient is different. I don't know. I'm not in chiropractic school yet, but soon. But I think, yeah, every patient is different. I think everybody has a different background. I know the field I want to get into is more deals with just kind of avoiding medication and remaining holistic and being able to bring the body back to natural balance via natural practices. Any more questions?
Thank you so much, Jesse.
So my name is Laura Northen, and my presentation is on psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism in corporate leadership. I am way too nervous, so forgive me if I'm redundant, and there's going to be a lot of times where things are just going to escape my mind. Basically, just a little bit about myself. Right after high school, I started to work for a nonprofit organization where I came across many professionals in various fields. And there I got to learn, I zoomed in on a lot of the personalities that people had. There was a lot of people who were very pleasant and, you know, polite and helpful. And then there was people who were, didn't exactly have any skills and didn't seem brilliant at all, but yet they seemed to move up the hierarchy, which I thought was very interesting. And I also noticed that people in leadership primarily had not very, I guess, great personality traits. So that's when I started to zoom in, and I wanted to know more about personality traits that make up, you know, a corporate leader. And so I decided to do my capstone presentation on corporate, you know, leadership. I wanted to understand whether, you know, dark personalities and corporate leaders are, whether it's beneficial or detrimental to the success of the corporation, because so many of them have these traits, but, you know, they're way up there in the hierarchy. So in order to study more about the dark personalities, research led me to the dark triad. And the dark triad is basically a group of 3 personality traits: psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. Collectively is basically a group. Collectively, it basically it just talks about, you know, all the dark and destructive traits that they have. And as I go further into the slides, you'll see that a lot of the characteristics kind of overlap, but they're very different, actually. So psychopaths. When we think about psychopaths, we think about what Hollywood portrays. We might think about movies, characters in movies such as Hannibal or Silence of the Lambs. Or even in real life situations, there's a Zodiac killer who still remains unknown, his identity. And he's killed many people in the 60s and 70s. We think about the BT killer who bind, tortures, and kills. And he's a killer in Kansas, and he was already sent to prison. So that's kind of what we think about. But Hollywood, one of the things that Hollywood aligns with the research that I did is that they lack empathy. They may understand your feelings, but they can't feel it themselves. So that's often, like a red flag in the workplace, because in order to understand, in order to interact and work with your staff, you need to understand how they feel and be in tune to their feelings. And then they're not all violent. A lot of times we think that they're violent. As a matter of fact, I'm actually reading a book. Can you just hold it up? His name is James Fallon. He was a neuroscientist. I'm actually just starting to read that. He's a neuroscientist who did a brain scan of himself, and it turned out that he was a full-blown psychopath. But he didn't know this until he was like 50 years old. And he's a successful neuroscientist with 4 children, and he's happily married. So they can be very manipulating. So it's all because they're trying. You never understand why their genuine purpose is, but they always have control over people. And then they can be charming, but the charmingness is basically it's fake, because they mimic behavior, and they're always looking at what you want to basically impress you. And also I want to make a comment that I did purchase the authority to use the pictures. It's not, that I was having like dark moments or anything. They just for some reason didn't show it. Yeah, it didn't show up. And then they can be very impulsive. Narcissism and psychopaths are actually very, very similar. The difference between narcissism, one of the big difference between narcissism and psychopaths is that psychopaths they lack emotion. Narcissism knows what they're doing, but they do it anyways. And they have they're always admiring themselves, so they want to be the center of attention. And in order to be the center of attention, they require admiration. So they're constantly doing things so that you can admire them, because that's what keeps them going. And then, of course, they have the sense of entitlement, and they're very arrogant, and they strive to be the best. And one of the things with narcissism is that it is actually based on a myth, a Greek myth, where a hunter fell in love with his reflection and in a pool of water, and then he drowned. So that's where that comes from, to give you an idea what narcissism is. And Machiavellianism. It is derived from the writer Niccolo Machiavelli, and it just basically it was used in his book that he wrote, where it talks about the corruption in politics. But Machiavellianism, they tend to be very cunning, narcissistic as well, because again they're overlapping traits that they all have, and then they believe that ends justify the means. And then rather than being liked, they actually like being feared. So they like to put that fear in you. So some of the benefits for a corporation to have a corporate leader is that they can be very ambitious. They're always looking for opportunities. They're always looking for ways to go. What is it? Corporate jump. They make good first impressions, and then they can be very persuasive, and they excel in negotiating, and they do a lot of risk taking. And yeah. Some of the negatives, although those may be good for a leader to have, some of the negatives is that they basically the environment is very hostile for everyone and unhealthy, for people to work in. So it's not like the best environment for workers. and then they're prone to anger and aggression, and then eventually colleagues see through them. So that's kind of where everything just kind of like falls apart, because they start to see, well, this person was very charming, but now as we continue to get to know him, he isn't, or she isn't. And then they focus, and then the biggest thing that I saw in my research is that they focus only on short-term goals for themselves and not long-term goals for the organization, which is a big reason why a lot of my research said not to hire people with dark personality traits. That was it. Thank you. Okay, any questions? I'm sorry I wasn't, very clear, but it's the anxiety.
Sounds good. Yeah.
What's up?
I have a question.
Yes.
Just a moment, let me pull myself together. I don't know how to ask my question. So, corporate leaders do you have numbers? How many corporate leaders have this kind of dark personality quality? It sounds kind of common that in corporations,
Yeah.
but I'm not from the corporate world, so maybe I just have this belief from movies.
The research that I did was basically all literary reviews, so it didn't really give me a number, but it just talked about how it's very, very common in corporate leadership, and it was almost as if to say that it's safe to assume that the majority of them were corporate.
Wow.
Yeah. Psychopaths and narcissists.
How did they conduct their studies? Was it just, I'm just curious on how, I don't know, they wouldn't take surveys or anything, or do they just observe different leaders and their traits?
They observed different leaders, but a lot of the articles that I pulled up were basically articles on other articles and other articles, so yeah, eventually.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so as many of you guys already know me, my name is Aya, and I did my capstone research on how dates compare to coffee beans by taste and nutritional value. So what are dates? They're actually fruits that grow on palm trees, and they're scientifically called Phoenix dactylifera. They belong to the family of Ericaceae, and as of 2014, the world production rate of dates was about 4.6 million tons annually, and it's still yet expected to rise. So why date seeds? Actually, my interest in date seeds arose from dates themselves. This kind of started from my family religious practices during the month of Ramadan. At the end of the day, it's traditional to break our fast on a date and a cup of milk. And so as a child, I would save my date seeds and take everyone else's. And so this is a picture of me and my homeschool teacher at a science fair project, that was my science fair project. I represented the life cycle of a butterfly using the date seeds themselves. And so as you can see, I've kind of always I was interested in finding a sustainable way or a use for the date seeds. And with some simple research, I found that I wasn't the only one interested in them. So dates have had significant value in many different religions, including Islam during the month of Ramadan, Palm Sunday for Christianity, and Passover for Judaism. The anatomy of a date. The date consists of a fleshy pericarp that makes up 85 to 90% of the mass. 10 to 15% of the mass is made up of the seed, and then there is a thin skin layer that covers the whole fleshy, meaty part. And dates are commercially sold in many forms, including fresh, dried forms. They're in many baked goods and in shakes. However, the seed actually doesn't receive much attention for being nutritionally valuable. And as of 2015, 100 tons of date seeds are available yearly by date companies in the United Arab Emirates that could be potentially used. So uses of date pits, they've been used in folk medicine to treat diabetes, gastrointestinal disorders, and liver diseases. They're currently mainly used for animal feed in the Arabian Gulf. They've also been added, they've been added to soil fertilizer because of their high mineral content, and oils have been extracted from the date seeds and have been used in cosmetic and pharmaceutical products. Some nutritional and health values of the date. So they have many nutrients, including fibers, moistures, proteins, vitamins, phenolics, and antioxidants, and actually about 70% of the seed itself consists of dietary fibers. And some of the most abundant fatty acids found were oleic, linoleic, and palmitic acid. And with the help of some phytochemical screening, the date seed extract showed to contain many phytochemicals, but some of which were absent was caffeine. And so as we compare it to coffee, the date seed beverage has a lower total phenolic compounds but has much more powerful antioxidants. So as an alternative to coffee, roasted and powdered date seeds have been used through many centuries in the Arabian world by rural communities. But today, on a very small scale, they're used to make a caffeine-free coffee-like drink that serves as an alternative product for individuals who like the characteristic aroma and flavor of coffee without the caffeine aspect. And so I conducted a taste test at school, a blind taste test, and it consisted of two groups, Group 1 and Group 2. And both individuals were given a consent form, and they were asked to complete a demographics part and a little bit of background of their coffee background, if they're coffee drinkers, when they drink coffee, how many cups they drink coffee, and etc. So the first group actually tasted the Folgers coffee first, while the second tasted the date seed. They both didn't know what type of coffee they were drinking. Then they were asked to rate the coffee based on 6 characteristics. And then they had a cup of water that was the control. And then they both tasted the following corresponding coffee, whichever one they didn't taste. They rated it the same 6 characteristics, and following that, they had a debrief about the coffees they drank, and they were told that one of them was the date seed. So these were images taken during the survey. So a little bit about the demographics of our participants. 39% were female, 61% were male. We had a wide range of age groups from younger than 18 all the way to older than 60. We also had a diverse group of races, and 80% of the participants were coffee drinkers while 20 were not. So some results about their coffee background. So I asked what coffee brands come to their mind, and the top 3 were Starbucks, Folgers, and Maxwell. So the top 3 reasons why they said they drink coffee is because it's refreshing and it's an energy booster, its taste, and its warmth. And another question that was asked was, when buying coffee, what are the most important qualities to them? And the top was the taste. Following was the location, the convenience of location, and the price. So these are some graphs of the 6 characteristics. I picked 3 of them, and the first one is the taste. So as we can see, the first graph is the taste of Folgers, and the bottom one is the taste of the date seed. Group 1 is the individuals who drank the Folgers first, and as you can see, 61.7% they agreed that the taste of Folgers, they liked it, and we can see that it's quite inverse as it compares to the date seed. 42.6% of them didn't agree that they liked the taste. And as we look at group 2, which were the individuals who tasted the date seed first, 56.5% said that they agree that the Folgers tasted well, and as we compare it to the date seed, 50% of them agreed that it was a good taste, and so we can see it's quite similar but a little less in quality. So same goes with the strength of the flavor. We got group 1, which were the individuals who tasted the Folgers coffee first, and 59.6% agreed that they liked the taste, and the same amount of individuals didn't agree with the date seed. But with group 2, the individuals who drank the date seed first, the date seed coffee first, 54.3% said they liked it, and as it compares to the date seed coffee, 45.7% agreed. So we can see similarity, and same goes here. It's quite inversely proportional. And they were asked if they thought it was likely that they would purchase the coffee. Mind you, they still don't know what coffee they're drinking. For the individuals who drank the Folgers first, they liked it, and we can see that again. We can see a huge difference with the date seed. But with the group 2, the individuals who drank the date seed coffee first, 50% agreed that it would be likely they would purchase the Folgers coffee, and 32.6% thought that they would buy the date seed. Now, after they finished rating and drank all their coffee, I gave them the debrief, and again I asked them if they thought the date seed could be an alternative to coffee made from coffee beans. And group 1, which were the individuals who had the Folgers coffee first, 34.1% thought that it could be an alternative. As we can see, before they knew, 27.7% thought that they would buy it. So their stance kind of changed after they knew what it was. And in group 2, the individuals who tasted the date seed coffee first, 73.9% thought that it could serve as an alternative. And this is the same question. I just thought to combine all participants from group 1 and group 2, and 53.8, a little over half of our participants thought that it could serve as an alternative. And so, as a conclusion from my taste test, the date seed coffee was acceptable when compared to the decaf Folgers coffee. However, it was a little less in quality because they rated it a little less. And for future research, I believe that date seeds could potentially serve as an addition to nutritional supplements due to its high mineral content and high dietary fibers. I also believe it would be interesting to see that since in my taste test, it was a blind taste test, so I labeled the date seed beverage as coffee. It would be interesting to see if it was labeled as a hot beverage, or maybe to do the taste test again but compare it to tea and see what responds, or if I would get if it would attract more non-coffee drinkers. So, yeah, thank you. I have a little table set up if you'd like to come and see. I have the two grinds, the Folgers grind and date grind. the coffee bottles I used, and these are some of my date seed collection. And grab a date if you'd like. Any questions? Yes.
Were the participants aware that it was decaf? I mean, for both?
After, yes, during the debrief.
They weren't told it was decaf?
They weren't told what coffees. They just knew they were tasting coffee.
And they weren't asked the direct question of which one do you prefer?
No. Yes?
And why did you choose decaf? I think I know. but
Because,
remind me.
as I said earlier, the date seed doesn't have any caffeine, and it would make sense to compare it to decaf. Any more questions?
Question. So, you know, like, I know that you like dates. And,
Yes.
And I have to admit that, before knowing you, I wasn't a fan of dates my own self, obviously. Seriously, I'm being honest. And so, how do you overcome that sort of stigma that some people may have around
Dates.
Around dates? Yes.
Yeah, as it's not very popular, or it's not something that, especially in our American culture, it's not very integrated in our food habits or stuff. I think just like, boba had its uprise. Nobody knew what boba was, or so. I feel like with a little bit of more commercial, I don't know, uprise or more attention. In the Middle East, it has a lot more attention. But even if you go into the more valleys of California, we do have large homes. We are one of the largest state that grows dates. And I do have my own little personal business that I started a few years ago. I make gourmet dates, and I stuff them with walnuts and chocolate and things.
Yeah.
My plan in the future is to open up a little date shop and make date pick coffee in my dates. Any more questions? Yes.
So the pit has a lot of fiber in it. So is there any use of that pit to where they can actually roast it or anything else where you need like peanuts or anything like that, or no? Is that?
Oh, I think that's a little hard, just from my own personal experience with the pit, because I tried roasting it and stuff. It's very hard. I don't think we can bite into it without
Okay.
grinding.
I mean,
Yeah, but that's an interesting question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The topic of my capstone is how healthy is the government's recommendations of animal protein in the American diet. So to start, just a little bit about proteins. Protein is one of the major macromolecules in the human body. It comprises over 50% of the dry weight of cells in the body. Proteins fulfill a variety of roles, anywhere from structural components in your hair and your muscle, nails, to antibodies in the immune system, to signaling molecules in the neurological system, to the different ones, hormones in the endocrine system. So just in the circles that I'm around, I've noticed that animal protein is a popular food group in the American diet. So I wanted to start by looking at the history of animal protein consumption, both globally and in America. With the advent of urbanization and industrialization in the late 19th century, and then later around the time of World War II, they've marked an increase in meat consumption in developed countries. In 2000, they reported that meat production had tripled since 1960. one of the key factors to the increase in meat consumption was wealth. So, as I was mentioning, in developed countries such as the US and the European Union, there's been a marked increase in meat consumption, but they're also noticing that it's increasing in developing countries, particularly as their income rises above the poverty level. So this first graph shows the increase in meat production across the globe from 1960 to 2000. The gray marks developed countries and white marks underdeveloped countries. The global meat production is shown here from 1961 to 2000. As you can see, both of them are increasing. So there's evidence that there's an increase in meat consumption and production across the world. Next, I wanted to look into why protein is so popular in the American diet. In 2016, it was reported that 64% of Americans were trying to consume more protein. Of this, 69% of it was animal protein. The top categories in descending order for which Americans believed protein was beneficial for were athletes, teens, weight loss, children under 12, and the elderly. Not only is it being noticed by researchers, but marketers and advertisers are also taking note of this. One example is in 2014, Milk was looking for a way to make milk more appetizing. Milk marketers, sorry, we were looking for a way to make milk more appetizing. They surveyed 2,500 teens and adults, and the top result that they found was milk provides 8 grams of protein per glass, which started the Milk Life campaign. Next, I wanted to look into the government's recommendations of animal protein in the American diet, so I turned to the U.S. dietary guidelines, which are supposed to be based on evolving nutrition science and serve as the government's official advice on what to eat. Now, the percentage of those in America who actually follow these guidelines are within the single digits, but it's very foundational and instrumental because the dietary guidelines form the foundation for health education and government programs. Some of these government programs include public school lunches, which feed 30 million children a day. The WIC, which is a federal special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, advice that you receive from the doctor's office, and other public programs. This is a little overwhelming. I'm just going to briefly summarize, but this just shows the USDA dietary guidelines over the years, and there's only been a slight change in the guidelines. Starting in 1894, it was recommended that you receive 1 serving of meat per day. Come to now, it's 2 to 3 servings of meat per day. I found 2 cases in which the government was going to try to reduce the amount of meat consumption recommended in the dietary guidelines. That was in 1977 and in 1992, and they received pushback from the meat industries, and in the end, there were no changes to the dietary guidelines for protein. I wanted to look at more recent news on the government's recommendations of protein, animal protein in the diet, and so I looked at the most recent dietary guidelines, which were released in 2015. This bottom figure right here is taken straight from the guidelines, and it just shows the 3 food groups from which they recommend that you receive protein from, and that's seafood, meats, poultry and eggs, nuts, seeds, and soy products. As you can see, they recommend that you get 26 ounces of meats, poultry, and eggs a week for your protein foods. I did a little calculations, and if you were to follow these guidelines, the percentage of protein that you would receive from meats, poultry, and eggs would be 67%, seafood would be 21%, and nuts, seeds, and soy would be 13%. With these numbers, it's no wonder that 69% of the protein that Americans receive in the diet is from animal protein. So the government is recommending 67% of protein to come from meats, poultry, and eggs. Here's a subnote from from the dietary guidelines concerning meat that they also put in there. There's strong evidence that lower intakes of meat are associated with a reduced risk in cardiovascular disease, moderate evidence that lower intakes of meat are associated with reduced risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and some cancers. They also add, however, some evidence has linked lean meats and lean poultry to healthy eating patterns. In my opinion, this is somewhat confusing advice. I found numerous reports concerning the controversy over the 2015 dietary guidelines. In the initial draft, they recommended that Americans cut back on red and processed meat. This, of course, received opposition again from the meat industries, and the final draft do not give any specific advice to cut back on red and processed meats, and they revert back to previous dietary guidelines. In particular, the meat industry did not like the footnote that reads, "A healthy dietary pattern is lower in red and processed meats." The meat industry claimed that Americans already receive the recommended daily allowance of protein that they need, so the government shouldn't recommend that we cut back on it. But do Americans receive the recommended daily allowance of protein? I did a little research, and the recommended daily allowance is 46 grams per day for women and 56 grams per day for men. In 2010, the average American consumed 128 grams per day. Dr. Marianne Nessel, who helped craft the 2015 dietary guidelines, said, "I was told we could never say eat less meat because the USDA would not allow it." Nina Techholz, an investigative journalist and Nutrition Coalition board member, noted, "These guidelines are virtually identical to those of the past 35 years, during which time obesity and diabetes have skyrocketed. Given the same advice, it's not clear why we should expect different outcomes." This led me to look into the leading cause of death in America. Throughout my research, the many studies showed that a decrease in consumption of animal protein was related to a decreased risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, and some cancers. From this diagram, you can see that heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, some of those that I just mentioned, are some of the top leading causes of death in America. This also is just another visual of heart disease, cancer, and diabetes in America. And as you can see, from the 1950s and 1960s until now, there's been an increase in prevalence of these diseases. There are many studies that I've found that related an increase in animal protein consumption to an increase in diseases, but the one that I chose to present to you today due to time was a study done by Esselstyn in 1987. Esselstyn took a group of 24 patients who were suffering from coronary artery disease, and he wanted to see if heart disease could be reversed by eating a whole foods plant-based diet. Coronary artery disease is the most common form of heart disease. It is basically an example of hardening and the narrowing of blood vessels that give blood to the heart. In the beginning of the study, there were 24, but 6 of them dropped out, so they ended up with 18. At the 5-year mark, he did an angiograph to look at the arteries, and all 11 that were tested had shown disease arrest, and 8 showed regression. In 1999, that's 12 years since the study, all 18 patients had not experienced any extension of disease, coronary events, or interventions. That's pretty spectacular considering that prior to the study, all 18 of these patients as a total had experienced 49 coronary events. These diagrams right here are angiographs of some of the patients that had experienced regression in their arteries. The arrows are pointing to the area where the blood vessel was constricted and hardened. The left is the before and then the right is after. As you can see in the after shots, they have dilated and they're healthy again in those areas. The last study that I wanted to show you is the Blue Zone study, which is one of my favorites. It was conducted in 2004 by National Geographic and the top longevity researchers. They searched around the world to find the top societies that live the longest to see how they live so long and why they're so healthy. The 5 societies that they narrowed it down to are mapped out here, and they found 9 commonalities. As far as diet is concerned, these societies eat plant-based foods, 95%. That makes up 95% of their diet, which contains vegetables, grains, greens, beans, and fruits. Beans make the base of the diet. And on average, they eat meat 5 times a month. And the serving size is 3 to 4 ounces, which is just 1 serving. If you compare this to the American diet, we eat 6 times this amount per month. So some believe, as the dietary guidelines say, lean meats can be part of a healthy dietary lifestyle. But if you look at the statistics from the 1960s onward, you can see that as animal protein consumption has increased, so has the risk of heart disease, diabetes, and some forms of cancer, which are all related to an increase in animal protein foods. Not to mention, American eats 2 times the recommended daily allowance of protein. The longest living societies, in contrast, only eat 95% of their foods from plant-based foods. These are just some of the plant foods. You can see the different categories: beans and legumes, grains, vegetables, and nuts and seeds that provide protein. I found that many studies show that you can receive all the amino acids you need by eating a variety of plant foods. Given the rise in heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, like Nina Teckholz said, eating the same way we've been eating over the past century is not going to bring a different outcome. Plant foods provide all the protein we need without risk for diseases. Thank you.
I have questions. I want to know what it is about Loma Linda.
The Loma Linda?
Loma Linda was one of the blue zones.
Yeah,
That's
they
just
are.
local. What are they doing there differently?
They have, because of their religion, they have many restrictions as far as diet and what they are allowed to eat. So that's one of the main things.
What's the religion?
Yeah.
Seventh-day Adventist.
Yeah. Seventh-day Adventist.
Oh.
Sorry, that's what I forgot to mention. I realized it's on.
Well, it was just, I had looked at your slide earlier
Yeah.
and I noticed and said, well, what's going on there? What are the 9 factors? You mentioned the food, but what are the other
Yes.
factors for those blue zones?
So I don't know them off the top of my head, but some of them include they have a strong sense of belonging, as far as like, how can I explain it?
Community.
Yeah, and they're also really community-based. They, a lot of them, one factor that I found really interesting is they stay active. So a lot of them are still out in the fields, cultivating food. They're still moving around and different things. I don't remember all the other ones off the top of my head, but those were some of the main ones. They also have a strong connection to some form of religion. So it's interesting.
And then they eat mostly.
And they eat mostly
plant-based.
plant-based foods.
Can we conclude that then that the nutritional science coming from the U.S. government has been compromised?
Yeah.
It's essentially fake news.
Yes. Another thing that I didn't find out until later, so I couldn't put it in my study yet, I was talking to another person, a close friend of mine, who actually goes out and he talks all about this. He's done a ton of research into this. I didn't know that the dietary guidelines were started by Abraham Lincoln. It was actually initially to help out the agricultural industries, to help give them more money and everything. And one of the biggest industries at that time was milk, dairy and meat. So all along they've been working with dairy and meat industries, basically.
So it's very political based.
Yeah.
It's
Those are a lot of things.
You mentioned linked to diabetes. So linked to diabetes, lean meat. There's a link from lean meat to diabetes.
It's meat in general usually. Usually they talk about processed and red meats are more strongly correlated with all these diseases, but then meat as a whole is what some of the studies would talk about too. But if you're looking for the strongest evidence, it would be red and processed meats. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. few minutes ahead of ourselves, so.
Alright, so hi, my name is Hariana Thompson, and I did my capstone on the RA experience, resident assistance perspectives on the position. Alright, so first, some of my motivations for this study was that I am currently an RA, as half of you in the room are, and I am interested in the field of residential life since I started in it my sophomore year. And it just kind of is really interesting, the teamwork aspect of how you can get on a team with people and work together on a common goal, even depending on, even though you guys are from different places, personality types, things like that. And then also interactions with residents. You don't really realize how many people you'll meet or know. Through this position, I just think it's interesting that people choose to be RAs, but also what they choose to do with those skills. So that was kind of my main motivation for going forward in that part. So here's some background. So RAs are resident assistants who are on college campuses. They are one of many of the student leaders that students get to interact with, but for the most part they work in housing. And it's not just check-ins and stuff. It doesn't just stop when the students come in. It's more of having someone there as a friend, someone, a companion, someone always in their corner, as a peer mentor kind of thing. The RA selection process, so basically RAs are selected by resident directors and a host of other people on a board in a group, and they're chosen from students that either outshine people or they think that this is the group of people that they want to have to lead students. Sometimes there are students that are very shy and they want to get out of their comfort zone, so that's kind of some options. Some roles of RAs, they're friends, they're a support system for the residents, they're student leaders on a college campus, and they help with the housing organization part. My question primarily was about what about the RA experience stood out and impacted RA's decisions on the position. And my hypothesis was that during my research I found a bunch of factors that factor into why an RA is an RA, why they quit, why they don't really like it, why they love it, why they choose to do it as a field, as a job later on, even though they started off with their job not being that. So all those factors were compiled out of my literature review, and I decided that was where my questions would come from, my survey questions. So these are the factors that I came up with. Some of them are self-explanatory, like safety and the idea of helping others and ownership and confidence, but things like burnout, meaning that you're in a position and it's just overwhelming and you kind of get tired of doing the position within it, but you still continue. Some of the financial benefits is a big one, whether they're being paid enough or the work equals the paycheck, things like that. And then being a role model, and then if they decide to do residential life or student affairs or anything like that after college, how did that RA position impact that decision? So my study, so I had 45 people I did do my survey from different schools. So Marymount was one of them, but the Res Life group was very small, much smaller, so I couldn't just do it off of them. But it was other schools such as Pepperdine, things like that. I'm not really sure 100% who they were because I just kind of sent the link out there in the email, and whoever responded. So I did an online survey. It started off in a paper form, but that was just going to take a lot more time to analyze, and I just wouldn't have gotten to the number of people that I did get to. I emailed it out to their supervisors at different schools and gave it to my current RA team. So, so most of the factors that I mentioned before were examined in the survey. The only one that was not examined was programming, because I didn't actually put any questions in the survey about that. But that was one in my research that came up as a really big reason why people continue to do it, because it's so much fun, and that's usually the fun aspect where they get to interact with residents, learn what they want, what the residents want to do, learn how a program impacted a person longer than just the face value of it. I had 45 people start the survey, 23 completed all the way through. That was mainly because I didn't have a way of making sure that once they started, they had to finish it. So some of them finished all the demographic sections, some people didn't answer all the questions. So that was kind of one of my issues with the survey. And then, so demographically, okay, so the ages were mostly between 18 and 23. The ethnicity was kind of all over. There was no more than another. The gender, there was 11 males and 30 females, which wasn't really surprising. In the research, it did show that mostly women are the ones who go into a field like this for a host of reasons. Some are ones that people don't like, as in the whole women like to mother, so that's why they want to be the residents and things like that. But that's kind of some of those reasons why that number is big as it is. I had 44% from private schools and 51 from public schools. So it was a little diverse on the different types of schools that were participating. Alright, so some of the surprising factors. The financial benefit one was the biggest one that I was kind of looking into because from personal experience and from what I've heard going to conferences in this field, like potential RAP and things like that, financial benefit is always a really big one. Associated with that, the factors that came out with those questions was burnout. One person said, because a lot of these questions were open-ended, one person said no amount of financial benefit can compensate with the emotional help RAs give to their residents. So that was kind of how they felt on the aspect that, yeah, you can pay them all if you want, but there's no way of measuring how much a person can impact a person by monetary value. And then financial benefits. The answer that stuck out the most to me was that this person said, I feel like we do more than what we get paid / compensated for. Just all the hours we spend off the clock helping the students and just being an RA at all times, regardless if we are wearing the uniform. So this kind of position is something that goes with you whether you want it to or not. And when you're having those resident interactions, they don't really look at you only to ask you a question when you're wearing the uniform. It's more of, oh, this is a familiar face, I'm going to ask them that question. So there's no way of actually paying an RA 24/7 for doing something that it's just going to happen. Another really big one that came out was, sorry, I apologize, I'm sick, residents' reactions to RAs. So a lot of this one was mainly we're helping others, role modeling, self-efficacy measure, mainly meaning that RAs had to answer how their residents feel about them on do they care, do they recognize you, do you feel like they learn anything from you. One of the role modeling examples was that one of the RAs mentioned that they don't know, maybe they think the residents look up to them, or one said because not only have they expressed it, but they've also have shown great respect and participation in programming and things like that. So some of them it's I don't know, maybe I help them, and then some of them it's very vocal that they help, or they can see it and they've seen a change from who they were when they first met them to who they are currently. The after college plans, there was two of the questions at the end of the survey were open-ended, and those talked about how if people who are currently RAs felt like they were going to go into the res life field, and 75% of them said no, which was interesting to me because I am someone who changed where I wanted to go because of this position, so I thought that was going to be reversed. Some of the plans that they mentioned were that they plan on applying their knowledge of students to their marketing jobs. They said that either to go into student affairs or be a marriage and family therapist, and then find a job that pays you better, which goes back to that financial benefit part that some people don't go into this position because they know the people who work in it don't get paid what they deserve, and it's just not really worth it to them. So these are just some of my graphs. So the relationship with residents, some of them know their names and know their faces for the most part. There were a few people that felt like they were just emotionally, maybe because they chose to be or didn't know the residents at all, which just kind of defeats the purpose of the position. And then the financial benefit, 75% of people said no, that the financial benefit is not worth what they do. and then 25% said yes. This one was really interesting that we had people that said no, that duty hours don't help residents, which is kind of odd because the point of duty is to help residents, but if people believe that they don't do anything, maybe there's an issue on that. So some of my limitations are that I didn't have follow-up answers for all of my questions, which is what I should have done, because the ones who said no that I thought were going to say yes, it would have been interesting to see why they said no. Like, why did they think that they weren't going to use these skills after, or why do they think duty hours are not going to work for helping residents? Maybe they felt another way was a better approach, or maybe they felt there was a different method that could be used, but they never actually expressed that in the position. The ethnicity breakout on the online survey, on the written one, it had Latino on it. On the online one, it didn't. So that other on the survey was like skyrocketed out of like what it wouldn't be. So that was kind of one of my smaller issues. And then the selecting more than one answer questions, I wasn't able to actually line those up to see who said what. So it was outrageous numbers of people saying things that I didn't really have connections to. And then some of my future plans for the study, I do want to continue the study in grad school, just to work with more RAs on that, maybe expand the schools, maybe go across the country, things like that. I also think that I should have reached more RAs in different parts of California. I know it didn't go up north and things like that. Starting the surveying early. And putting more input from professional staff in the survey and the actual study. I did use Marymount's professional staff in my paper, but I didn't really use it as much in this actual survey questions. I think it would have been interesting to survey them as well, just kind of see where their journey started and how they got there. And then, just passing this information on. It's helpful for those who may want to do Res Live, or maybe it'll change their perspective to know that they're not alone in the financial benefit one. They're not alone, that they don't feel confident at the beginning, and stuff like that. Right. So that's it.
So if you're gonna continue on in grad school, would you consider like surveying RAs like when they're freshmen versus when they're seniors? Like if they continue to do it the whole way, like how their perspectives have changed, like if it impacted like them the same way it did you?
Yeah, I would think of doing a longitudinal study. The only thing you wouldn't start with freshmen is mostly sophomores, because they can't really apply for the job when they get there. But yeah, I would think that would be a really interesting one to see if they, follow a group of students, see if they stay in the position, if they had a want to stay in the position. Kind of at the end of the day, like they may not get hired to do it again, but that would be really interesting to see if that was a pattern. So yeah, I probably would.
So you had under the financial benefits, so whether or not they felt RAs felt like they were being compensated, you had burnout under that. And
yes.
So I was wondering if what you meant was because that led to burnout, feeling like you're being underpaid for what you're doing is a contributing factor to burnout.
Yes, that was kind of what I was getting at, because the those two factors were the ones that were answered by the financial benefit questions on the survey. So those people who said that, they didn't think it was worth it, I connected that to the fact that maybe they just feel overworked and they feel as though they're not being appreciated. So maybe that's why they are, feeling that way. So I think that was kind of what I was trying to connect, but it connected here but not there. Yeah.
So you showed that of the people you surveyed, about 25% of them plan to go on within the field. Did you look at that subgroup in particular, if there were any trends amongst their answering groups, or were there anything that stood out specifically? So those ones were like, yes, I changed my mind, this is my career. Did they have any themes in their answers?
So it's very interesting because I looked at that yesterday. So the 25%, when I looked at their individual survey answers put together, those are the ones who said that, that 25% of people who said they didn't feel that they felt the financial benefit was worth it, because it didn't matter how much money they were making, that they enjoyed the position in either way. So those are those people who, they may think that the money is not worth it, but they're not going to say it, and they're just going to continue to do it. And that was kind of they felt that the residents looked up to them. They felt that duty was very helpful for residents. They felt that that they felt really confident when they started the position. These were the people that didn't feel as though when they started they were nervous. They were like, okay, I'm excited, I'm ready to go. And they still felt that way afterwards. So that was kind of the connection with those answers. Yeah.
Have you ever thought about maybe condensing, not condensing, but separating it? Because I know a lot of the times at conferences I see rap and stuff like that, you learn that different res life departments are different based on how big they are or how small they are. Would you ever focus in on a big school, focus in on a smaller school, just so that you can get more
yeah, I think
how you want to go?
no, that's kind of the idea. I wanted to identify. Because of this, it was random, so I didn't get a big population from Marymount and a big population from whatever other schools. I want to be able to separate the schools and know that these are the answers from this group and look at their res life structure and see, what are their responsibilities and what do they have to do and the requirements and the hours and things like that, because it's all different. And then kind of looking at, are those answers still the same regardless if they are on duty more often or regardless if they have weekend duty. I mean, we're new to the weekend duty thing, but everybody's been doing it forever. So it's the difference in that, we feel overworked, but they're doing weekend duty, how do you see, you know what I mean? So that's kind of the idea that I wanted to do, was to be able to pinpoint each institution instead of just having them all together. So that's the kind of the long run, yes.
Okay, so we're running a little late.
Yeah.
I'm sure some people want to talk to you after but our next presenter is.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Hello, my name's Matthew Zubich. My title of my project are Diamonds Are Not Forever, look at Major League Baseball, and is decreasing fan base. It's play on words, baseball is played on a diamond. And so as we look at my table of contents, I want to explain why I chose this topic. I was really struggling and figuring out, well, first of all, I know you're all thinking, oh, baseball player is going to pick something in baseball, but I really didn't want to do that, but it just made sense to me because baseball has given me the opportunity to come back to school after taking a long time off. So I feel that baseball is very valuable to me. So a lot of you may not know, but baseball is struggling keeping a loyal fan base right now. And I'm going to go through that later on, but a brief history of baseball. It's known as America's pastime. It's the first professional sport, team sport out of all the basketball, football, hockey, and so first professional team was in 1869, and that was over 140 years ago. And now there are 30 professional teams in Major League Baseball with over 240 affiliated teams, which are the minor league teams and other professional teams. So next we have the average baseball fan. So the average baseball fan viewer is the oldest average viewer of any sport other than golf. And so golf is known as old person sport. That's what people think of when you think of golf. It's slow, a little boring if you ask some people, but golf is 58 years old, the average age, and baseball's average age of the viewer is 53 years old. Also, the average is male, middle, upper class, white, and another thing is children aren't tuning in, so they're losing out on a generation of viewers. So next I have this chart, which is shows. I'll start with this. So this is the median age according to ESPN of viewers. So you can see in 2014 the age was 46 for baseball, and since then since 2014 it's gone to 53, while the other sports are staying the same or slowly rising. But NFL doesn't really have a problem with fans. They're always going to make billions of dollars. And another interesting graph is over here, the World Series viewership. So the highest ever World Series viewership, not just a game, but the whole series, was in 1978 with 44.3 million. That was the Yankees versus Dodgers, two huge markets, New York, LA, so it makes sense. But you can see that it's decreasing. It's decreasing pretty fast with bumps in the road where it gets high and then it goes way low and it gets a little higher. And so everyone said, oh, the Cubs last year had a huge following. So Cubs last year they were a little over 23 million viewers for the whole series, so it went up significantly. And the Game 7 was the highest ever viewed World Series game ever. But that's kind of an exception because the Cubs, they didn't win for 100 years if you didn't know, and it doesn't happen every year, so it was kind of an exception. So next we have stadium attendance. So stadium attendance is important because the owners put so much money into, like, Dodgers sold for over $2 billion, and the way to make that money back is through people coming to games, paying money on tickets, concessions, souvenirs, parking, stuff like that. You notice we go to Dodger game, parking $25 or something. So, but there's some other factors in other cities that affect stadium attendance. So cities with a larger population tend to have a larger attendance rate, and the people who are going have a higher income, and they make a little bit more money. So, and another affected rate of stadium attendance, people go more when the teams have a higher team payroll, which means their players have higher salaries than others. And for example, Dodgers have the highest payroll in the whole MLB, and they have consistently high stadium attendance. So star players also obviously make a difference. People want to see the star players. So it sells tickets, and age of stadiums. So it's interesting that newer stadiums, with not including Cubs, the Red Sox, and Dodgers, because those stadiums are kind of historical landmarks, but the newer stadiums have better attendance than older stadiums. So I have this graph, kind of a little blurry, but this kind of shows how a better team and star players will affect prices and meet the demand of the fans who want to come to the game. So you can see in 2011 it starts for the Cubs. I looked at just the Cubs here. So the average ticket was $31, and the Cubs did not have star players then. They were not contenders, and you can take a look at last year, 2016, before they won the World Series. It went up to 65 average ticket. So it'd be interesting what it is this year after winning a World Series. You know how people jump on bandwagons and want to see a World Series team. So it'd be interesting to see this year. So attendance history. In the early days, when they started taking attendance, the best win record had the best attendance. That was from 1904 to 1957, and the better quality stadiums now have the better attendance, like I said in the last slide. But it's true, the newer stadiums, state of the art, there's more people going into those games. So another interesting thing, fastest games are getting teams that continually have faster games have higher attendance. So that meaning that there's a research study done that over 10,000 games, so then they took the average time that team took to finish a game. We all know baseball games can get long, so so the teams that had the fastest games, not necessarily if they were winning or losing, but had better attendance rates. So that was pretty interesting. And so 1985, 2009, the ticket sales remained consistent, but actual attendance was weakening over time. So in that study as well, they found out that teams are kind of selling tickets to companies and stuff for $10 for 100 tickets, and they're saying, oh, we have a sold out game today, and you see about 20,000 seats open. And so the actual attendance is actually going down because they're going through turnstiles and they're looking through how many people go through that. So, all right. Next is youth participation. So, children are not as interested in baseball anymore. So children 7-17 playing baseball declined 24% from 2002 to 2012. It's a huge number if you take into consideration the population growth, and it is a lot of people not playing Little League baseball anymore. So why is it seeming? It's because it's less attractive to the millennial generation. So when people ask me if I play sports, I tell them baseball, and they always say, "Oh, I like baseball, but it's boring. It's slow. It's long, right?" So we live in a millennial generation now where everything you want is a click away, and attention spans are getting smaller and smaller. So, and to go in technology, baseball isn't really meant to involve technology like how basketball, everyone fills out a March Madness tournament bracket on the internet now, and NFL, you play fantasy football and DraftKings and all that. So baseball has not found a way to integrate technology into gaining more younger fans. So this I did not add on the slide, but another reason interest has gone down because the chance of making it as a player is only 1% of high school players play some kind of professional ball, so minor league baseball, and there's more than 6,000 minor leaguers, and of those, there's over 6,000 minor leaguers, and there's only 750 major leaguers at a time. So if it's 1% chance to become one of the 6,000, it's significantly less to become one of the 750 that are actually in the major leagues. All right, so this is a graph done by the National Sporting Goods Association, and it's reasons why kids are participating. They did surveys and conducted some research, and it found that 17% is because they no longer like the sport. This is team sports in general, so it's not just baseball, but I thought it was pretty interesting. Just they lose interest. That's the biggest factor in playing team sports anymore. And you can see that there's too much travel, getting older, less opportunities, like I said, and so next we have strategies. So how MLB, the Major League Baseball, solve the problem? So always effort is to increase attendance and spending at the stadiums. You want people there. Your product is on the field, so you want people to come see your product and spend money at the stadium. So there have been rule changes to make the pace of play a little bit faster, and there's been some ideas. So pace of play, that's the biggest issue right now because it's too long, too boring. That's the general consensus of baseball. So there has been implemented a timer in between innings, so guys aren't walking out, and so if you don't get a pitch in that timer, you get a ball or something. But so that hasn't been that effective. The games are still really long, so there have been ideas to make games shorter, as in innings-wise. There's been people who want 7-inning games instead of 9-inning games, which would be, purists of the sport who are of that 53 and older. You know, they definitely don't want it, but you know, there's also been ideas to limit player subs so that people aren't calling time every play. So, you know, the problem isn't, you know, there's just a lot of ideas and there's not enough action being made. So, L&D needs to take action because they're the future of Major League Baseball isn't looking promising, because although, let me add this, right now economically Major League Baseball is doing better than it's actually ever had, but it's the generation of fans they're going to be missing out on, which will lead to a economic downside in the future, because they're losing so many kids playing baseball, coming to games, fans are getting older. So it's not too late to make these changes, but without the youth there is no future, and with this, you know, millennial era coming, and it'll be tough, but tough to, you know, adapt to the generation. And I have this picture, which is kind of funny, of about 8 girls on their phones at a baseball game. So, thank you. Questions?
Are children more interested in playing hockey and football and those other team sports, or is it all team sports?
Well, football, you know, they have their own things because of the injuries that are.
Well, of course, that's a whole different issue.
Yeah,
but you said that children, 24% decline in children choosing to play baseball in 10 years, 2010 and 2012.
Right, that's.
Well, have the other sports declined too, or is this?
Well, I've seen a couple studies. It wasn't my main research,
Sure,
the other sports, but yeah, team sports in general. Like I saw the factors of team sports why they're declining. They're generally going down, but the significant one is baseball, and little leagues are losing out on a lot of players. And
Wow, interesting.
What would you, as like a player and a fan, want to see change?
me as a player, so if they called me up, the MLB called me up tomorrow, I mean, I'm sure they've had people working at this. It's not a secret. They know they're missing out on a generation, but I would say make players more marketable. Make them. You want stars out there, and I don't see you see, you know, LeBron James in every single commercial you see, and then you gotta get your stars out there like Bryce Harper, Mike Trout. You know, guys. I'm sure a lot of people, you know, don't even know who those guys are, right? You know, it's like people, if you ask them a baseball player, like most likely they're gonna say, oh, Babe Ruth. Yeah. You know, Babe Ruth, Derek Jeter, they don't play anymore, so.
Great question. Your last slide, you said about, put up another question about gender and about women's interest in sports as well. Right. And so is it the I guess what a factor that's attracting the women's interest in watching these actual sports play a role in this attendance issue?
Right. Yeah, I didn't go too much into gender, but I did see it is more male strong because, you know, it's you grow up, you know, you have a catch with your dad, you know, it's more of a, softball isn't as promoted. There's no professional, there's no representation of women, so it's you know, more relatable to men, and that's why I would say there's more men fans, but.
Yeah, I think that that's also true for football, but not as much with basketball, right. Which may be why basketball has it, because lots of high schools promote you girls basketball as much as boys basketball, but in these other team sports it doesn't seem to be as much.
However, in football, all that cheering gets the girls involved. Right. So you don't cheer in baseball. Yeah, I think that's it. Interesting.
That is interesting.
What are the baseball cards? I know I was in baseball cards. Like I remember kids
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Baseball cards are still collectible. I still have a big tub in my room. Yeah. But it's like it's kind of they go through trends, you know. It's kind of like a fashion style. Sometimes it's popular, it worth a lot of money. Sometimes it's
Like
not.
it doesn't reel in the younger, like, you know, like little kids, like back in the day, like
Right,
Pokemon cards.
right,
You know what I'm talking
exactly,
about?
yeah.
I guess
Well,
that's-
you know, now you have a phone where you could look up
That's true.
players' cards.
That's true.
Yeah.